The rain poured down like a thick gray curtain, blurring the faint neon lights outside St. Mary's Hospital in Phoenix. Inside the duty room, Helen, the head nurse, her hair tied high and dark circles shadowing her sleepless eyes, was trying to swallow the last sip of cold coffee. The night shift, she thought, would be like any other: false alarms, emergency patients from accidents, a few late hospital transfers. But then, a sound echoed, not an alarm, not an ambulance siren, but the quiet swoosh of the automatic door sliding open. Helen looked up, and her heart nearly stopped. Under the cold light of the waiting lobby, a massive lion stood, its majestic body soaked in rain, its golden mane drooping like a wet halo. It didn't roar, didn't charge, it just stood there. But what froze Helen in place wasn't the lion itself, it was what it held gently in its mouth: a small bundle of cloth, carried with the utmost care, as if the lion was afraid of hurting whatever was inside. The entire hospital sank into a surreal silence. Doctors, security staff, patients, everyone stood frozen like statues. Only the sound of rain tapping rhythmically on the glass ceiling remained, like a background score to an unbelievable scene. And in that moment, in the slow but steady beat of her heart, Helen felt something beyond reason. A gaze from the lion, deep, intelligent, and hauntingly sorrowful. An ancient soul, carrying something far greater than itself. Helen set down her cup of coffee and walked toward it. That was the moment I knew this night would be unlike any other shift. Helen Carter. Helen took careful steps, her shoes making soft sounds against the cold tiled floor. Every eye was on her. But in that moment, there was only her and Aslan, the lion with a golden mane like the sunlight that hadn't yet broken the dawn. Aslan didn't move, he just stood there, his amber eyes following Helen's every step. There was no roar, no aggression, only a deep, solemn stillness, as if the entire world had paused for a reason humans had yet to comprehend. As Helen drew closer, Aslan gently lowered the cloth bundle from his mouth. He bowed his head, nudged the bundle toward her with his damp nose, and then sat down. Not the kind of sitting that suggested rest, but as if he was entrusting something sacred, something greater. Helen knelt, her hands trembling. Slowly, she unwrapped the rain-soaked fabric. And then, her heart clenched. It was a newborn, a baby boy, just a few days old. His skin pale, his lips bluish, his breathing so faint it was nearly undetectable. But his tiny eyes, in that instant, fluttered ever so slightly, as if acknowledging her presence. The entire lobby erupted when Helen suddenly sprang to her feet and shouted, "Call the pediatric team. We need an incubator, now." Medical staff rushed in, but Aslan didn't move. He remained seated, like an ancient guardian, watching every motion Helen and the doctors made. And when the baby was placed in the incubator, Helen turned back, gasping for breath, her gaze locking once more with the lion's. In that moment, she knew this creature was not just a wild animal. He had come for a reason. And she had just touched the first sacred mystery of that night. Once the baby lay still inside the incubator, the medical monitors began to emit steady, rhythmic beeps. Helen stood quietly in the corner, her eyes still fixed on the hospital lobby, where Aslan, the mysterious lion, remained unmoving like a living statue under the dim hospital lights. Then a young nurse, her face pale with confusion, rushed over to Helen, clutching something tightly in her hand. "Helen, this, I found it in the baby's blanket." Helen took it. It was a gold locket, slightly tarnished with age, yet still holding the delicate craftsmanship of something once cherished. She opened it, and her heart seemed to stop for a moment. Inside was a faded, old photograph. A young woman holding a newborn baby, her eyes glowing with tender love. And on the back of the locket, engraved in worn but clear script, "For Anna, protect our son. At all costs." Helen gripped the small object tightly. "Anna," she whispered. A chill ran down her spine. Not just because of the name, but because her intuition screamed. This wasn't just an abandoned child. The air in the room grew heavy. Aslan still sat there, but this time, when Helen looked again, he had turned his head, gazing toward the hospital's main entrance. A moment later, he stood, not hurried, not afraid, and began to walk slowly toward the door, the soft rainfall outside still tapping on the pavement. Before stepping out, he turned back one last time, and in his eyes, Helen saw something almost human. Reassurance. As if he knew, the mission was complete. As if he knew, the child was now safe. Helen stood still, the locket clutched in her hand, while questions began flooding her mind. Who is Anna? Why would a lion deliver this child? And why does it feel like someone is watching? From very, very far away? The rain had stopped, but inside Helen, another storm was beginning to form. A storm of unanswered questions. She was still standing in the hospital corridor, eyes fixed on the door that had just closed behind Aslan's departing figure, when a voice crackled through the security team's radio. Helen, there's a man in the main lobby. He's drenched, holding a photo, and says, he's looking for his son. Helen's heart pounded. She rushed toward the entrance, where a small crowd had gathered, staff, police, and a few curious onlookers. At the front stood a tall man, his hair disheveled, clothes soaked from the rain, hands trembling as he clutched a photo now blurred by water. His panicked eyes scanned every face until they landed on Helen. You're a nurse here? He asked. Voice hoarse. Helen nodded. I'm Helen. You're looking for your son? The man handed her the photo. It left her speechless. It was the same woman from the locket. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was this man, his arm wrapped around his wife, the other cradling a newborn. His face radiated pride and unmistakable love. My name is David, he said, voice cracking. My wife, Anna, died 3 days ago in a car crash while driving our son to the hospital. I went out to find help. When I came back, the car was gone. And so was the baby. Helen gripped the locket tighter in her hand. She once told me, if anything ever happened, to trust Aslan, the lion she used to care for at a wildlife sanctuary when she was young. She always said he was special. That if her soul couldn't protect our son, Aslan would do it for her. A lump rose in Helen's throat. She opened her hand. In her palm lay the matching locket, a perfect half of a pear. David froze. That was Anna's. He whispered. We had two, one for her, one for the baby. Helen spoke gently. David, your son, is alive. He was saved by Aslan. Tears welled in David's eyes. He stood in stunned silence, lips trembling, unable to form words. Helen pointed toward the neonatal care unit. Go to your son. And so, like a miracle stitching two worlds together, the world of the living and the departed, of humankind and sacred beast, David stepped forward, heart full of awe and gratitude. Not just because his child had survived, but because his wife's love, through a promise made to a lion, had crossed death itself. To keep that promise alive, David walked slowly toward the neonatal intensive care unit, each step as if moving through a fragile dream. Behind the clear glass, the baby lay in the incubator. A tiny face, chest rising and falling with faint breaths. But alive, miraculously, not a single scratch. Helen stood beside him, still gripping the locket tightly. She said nothing, only watched David, giving him space to face something that even science could not explain. David placed his hand on the glass, tears silently streaming down his face. He looks just like Anna, he whispered, as if afraid to break the delicate stillness. Those eyes, they're hers. Inside the incubator, as if sensing something, the infant turned his head toward his father. A tiny hand, weak and trembling, reached upward, as if trying to touch the man standing before him. Helen held her breath. In that moment, across the barrier of glass, between life and death, between the human world and something sacred without a name, a reunion took place beyond logic. You know, Helen whispered, he was brought here, not by a person, but by a creature your wife trusted completely. David nodded, eyes never leaving his son. Anna always said Aslan wasn't just a lion. She spoke of him like an ancient soul, reborn with a purpose. He pulled out a small piece of paper, crumpled by rain and time. She left this, before we left that day. Helen opened it. The handwriting was shaky, unsteady. If I don't return, trust in the soul of the deep forest. Aslan will hear, and he will bring our child back to the light. A chill ran through Helen. How could a lion understand? How did he know the way to the hospital? Know to knock on the door. Know to wait, and deliver your child to the right person? David let out a long breath. But instead of doubt, his eyes shone with a sorrowful reverence. Because Anna taught him love. And love is the one thing that crosses every boundary. even the boundary between man and beast, between life and what lies beyond. Helen clenched her hand. In that moment, she was no longer just a nurse. She was a witness to something no textbook would ever mention, something that could only be understood with the heart. The sky was just beginning to brighten. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the thin mist, casting a gentle golden hue over the hospital grounds. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. Something sacred had happened during the night, and it wasn't over yet. Helen stepped out the front doors with David. Outside, puddles still lingered from the rain. The air was cool and damp. She looked down, footprints. Clear, large, even. Aslan went that way. Helen pointed toward the path leading into the small forest behind the hospital. He may not have gone far. David gave a silent nod. Still clutching Anna's locket, they quickened their pace, drawn by an invisible force, as if something beyond them was guiding the way. Crossing the wet grass, Helen suddenly stopped. A golden lion's mane hair. Lying there, not muddy, not wet, completely dry, as though the storm had never touched it. "That's impossible," she whispered. David picked it up, resting it in the center of his palm. "She once told me, Aslan only sheds a single hair in his lifetime. When his mission is complete." Neither of them said a word. In the hush of dawn, the forest breeze whispered like the breath of something ancient and eternal. Then, from a distance, through the silver fog, a figure emerged. Aslan, towering, majestic, regal. But he didn't approach. He didn't roar. He just stood there. His amber eyes shone with a gaze that felt deeper than any ocean. It wasn't merely a look. It was communion through instinct. Helen placed her hand over her heart. She felt it. A silent message. "I have fulfilled my mission. The child's soul now belongs to the light. And her love, Anna's love, brought me here. But my path continues." David whispered a final farewell. "Thank you, her faithful friend." Aslan turned away. Not hurried, not hidden. Every step a prayer, vanishing into the forest. A place no map could ever record. Helen remained motionless, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from reverence. We just said goodbye to a soul that never truly belonged to this world. David grasped her hand, his eyes still following the fading tracks. "We didn't just witness a miracle. We stepped into the beginning of a legend." Back in the hospital corridor, Helen and David walked in silence. In their hands, two identical lockets. One belonged to David. The other had been found in the baby's blanket. Both engraved with the same words. "For Anna, protect him, no matter the cost." But Helen felt something wasn't finished. "David," she said quietly, "do you notice anything? Mine feels slightly heavier, like there's something inside." David furrowed his brow. "You think there's a hidden compartment?" Without a word, Helen reached into the pocket of her white coat and pulled out a fine-tipped tweezer. Her hands trembled slightly as she carefully pried along the inner rim of the locket. Click! A soft pop. A tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper slipped out, protected by a nearly invisible plastic sleeve. Helen unrolled it slowly. Written in faded purple ink. Still legible. "If Aslan fails, go to the sanctuary, East Trail, under the tree with 3 roots. Code 1127A. David froze. The sanctuary, that's the place Anna used to care for Aslan when she was young. It was shut down years ago. Helen's eyes lit up, a quiet fire sparking within them. Then maybe she prepared for even the impossible. They looked at each other. They didn't need to speak. Both knew. Another door had just opened. David reached for Helen's hand, gripping it firmly. "We'll go. But this time, not just for the child. For Anna. For whatever it was she fought so hard to protect, until her very last breath." Helen nodded. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the pull of destiny. "And maybe then, we'll learn how Aslan knew to come. Why he arrived, exactly when he did." Inside Helen, a question began to rise like a tide. Is this still a story about a child? Or about a promise that reached beyond life and death? Helen and David set out at dawn. The sun had just begun to break through the horizon. But in their hearts, the clouds remained heavy. Using the code from the note, they made their way to Timber Grove Wildlife Sanctuary. A place Anna once called home. Where Aslan had been raised not as a beast, but as a sacred companion. The entrance was sealed with rusted wire fencing. A faded sign warning, Restricted area, danger. But nothing could turn them back now. Inside, nature seemed to whisper of memories past. Overgrown trails. Abandoned enclosures covered in moss. And there, a single lion paw print pressed into the wet earth. "It's him," Helen murmured. "Aslan came back here." They continued east, just as the message had instructed. At last, beneath a towering oak with 3 gnarled roots exposed above ground, exactly as described, they stopped. David knelt and gently dug into the soil. The earth gave way easily. Soon, his fingers touched metal. An old tin box. Inside were a worn leather-bound journal etched with the words, "For Aslan." A black and white photo, young Anna, eyes glowing, sitting beside a lion cub. And finally, a small USB drive, sealed in waterproof casing. Helen opened the journal. On the first page, in Anna's delicate handwriting, it read, "If my son survives, if Aslan finds his way to the world of men, then I still believe there is hope. Aslan is not just a lion. He is a gatekeeper, the last guardian I trust." David's hands trembled as he read. His eyes welled with tears. She prepared for the impossible. She believed Aslan was the bridge. Helen clutched the journal to her chest. Maybe, she knew everything. Maybe her love awakened something in Aslan. Something greater than himself. They looked at each other. The story was no longer about a child abandoned in the storm. It was about a sacred covenant. Between human and wild. Between a mother and a soul of the wilderness named Aslan. A protector. A being summoned when there was no one left to save. Helen and David returned to the hospital. The small USB still wrapped safely in its waterproof pouch. They entered a quiet room bathed in the golden hue of late afternoon light. Helen's old laptop sat waiting on the desk. David inserted the USB. The screen flickered, and the video began. Anna appeared. Her face was pale, worn by time, yet her eyes still shone. Just as they had when David first met her in that quiet veterinary clinic. Behind her, the familiar backdrop, Timber Grove Sanctuary, the wooden cabin she once called home. "If you're watching this, then I'm probably gone." Her voice was low and steady, gentle like the whisper of trees in deep forest silence. "Aslan is not just any lion. When I was a child, I witnessed something no one believed. He saved me from a stranger in the woods. Not with claws, but by placing himself between me and the danger. As if he knew I was the one entrusted." The video was brief, but each word cut through the room like soft, sacred thunder. "When I became pregnant, I would sit beside Aslan, place my hand on my belly, and say, 'If something happens to me, you must protect this child.' Some people say love doesn't cross the veil. I believe the soul, when filled with enough love, can move through any boundary." Helen covered her mouth. David's shoulders shook. His tears came freely. "If Aslan brought my son to you, please understand, it wasn't random. He is a bridgewalker, one who walks between invisible gates. He carries a memory older than we can fathom. But he always listens. And when love is strong enough, he answers." Anna looked down, her voice now barely a breath. "His name is Elijah. Let him live. Let him know a lion once walked through the storm for him. And that a mother's soul watches her child, even when it becomes the wind." The screen faded to black. Silence. Helen turned to David, tears streaming down her face. "She didn't die in vain." David whispered, his voice trembling. "No, she sent our son, through a gatekeeper god." And then, as if the universe responded, the wind chime at the window stirred softly, though the air was still. Helen and David left the hospital in the late afternoon. In the car, Elijah slept peacefully in his father's arms, wrapped in the warm blanket Helen had carefully chosen herself. On the passenger seat, the golden locket swayed gently with each turn. 2 hearts. 2 souls. 2 moments in time that could never be erased. Their destination was unclear. They only knew one thing. They had to return to the place where Aslan had begun this strange journey, Timber Grove Sanctuary. On the outskirts of Phoenix. The place where Anna once lived. The place where Aslan had been raised as part of the family. And perhaps, the place where he was waiting for one final thank you. By the time they arrived, the sun had dipped behind the treetops. The sanctuary was silent, filled only with the hum of insects and the faint glow of light from the small wooden cabin. Now covered in moss, David stepped out first, his eyes scanning the rusted fence. Hesitation heavy in his chest. Helen followed quietly, holding Elijah in her arms. She stood in the open yard, the wind cold against her skin, as if something unseen were watching. Aslan, she called softly, uncertain if she should even hope. There was no roar, no footsteps, only silence. But then, from the shadow of the trees, a figure emerged. Aslan. He walked slowly, silently. His mane hung low in the darkness, but his golden eyes burned like twin flames, fixed on Elijah. He didn't roar, he didn't growl, he simply knelt. David was speechless. Helen's hands trembled as she stepped closer with Elijah. He's healthy, because of you. Aslan closed his eyes, a silent nod. Elijah slowly opened his eyes, staring at the strange creature bowed before him. Then, his tiny hand reached out and touched the lion's mane. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The sky in the distance shimmered, not with lightning, but with a faint aurora, stretching above the trees. A sign? A miracle? No one could say, but Helen could feel it clearly. They were no longer standing in a forest, but at the threshold between the world of the living and the spirit realm. David knelt, eyes red with tears. Thank you, for keeping your promise to her. Aslan lifted his head. That final look in his eyes held something, not of an animal, but of a guardian soul, a symbol beyond human comprehension. He turned away, step by step, without looking back, and just like that first night, Aslan vanished into the deep forest. Returning from the Timber Grove sanctuary, Helen still carried in her heart the final gaze of Aslan. But when she walked through the hospital doors the following morning, she was no longer just a nurse. She had become a living witness to something the scientific world refused to acknowledge, something that couldn't be explained, yet couldn't be denied. And then the news spread. Someone had captured a blurry video of Aslan in the hospital hallway that night. Online tabloids began running sensational headlines. Lion brings infant to hospital? Miracle or elaborate hoax? Lion guardian, hero of our time? Helen became the center of questions, of doubt, and even ridicule. TV networks called non-stop. Some fellow doctors began showing signs of irritation. They said, "You're discrediting medical science. We saved that baby, not some wild animal." But Helen did not back down. She organized a small press conference, bringing only 2 items with her: Anna's golden locket and the photograph David had provided. In her hands was also a copy of Elijah's medical file, annotated with the notes. No physical injuries, no head trauma, no bite marks. There was only one oddity. The infant's body temperature had never dropped to a dangerous level during the hours he had been exposed to the cold outdoors. As if something had kept him warm. A life was saved. Helen spoke into the microphone, voice calm and steady. And the one who brought him here had no name, no ID, and wasn't human, but clearly possessed awareness, purpose, and love. Some in the room laughed, but most fell silent. A few days later, a zoologist from the Smithsonian flew in to meet with Helen privately. He wanted to hear the full story, every detail. He said, "I can't prove it, but I also can't deny it. There have been records of extraordinary bonds between humans and animals, but never like this." Helen understood that she wouldn't be able to convince everyone, but she didn't have to. Elijah was alive. Anna had kept her promise. And Aslan, though now gone, had left behind a mark that could never be erased in the hearts of those who had witnessed him. The following month, the sky over Phoenix was bluer than usual. The sun no longer blazed, it stretched warmly like a soft blanket. In the backyard of St. Mary's Hospital, one of the last remaining open spaces in the heart of the city, a small plaque had just been erected. Engraved upon it were the words, "Solomon's Gift, a rescue fund for newborns and wildlife. Established in honor of loyalty and love that transcends species." Helen stood beside David, her hand clutching Anna's old locket. In her arms was Elijah, now rosy and healthy, peacefully sleeping under a light blanket. David spoke first before the crowd. "I once lost faith in miracles. But today, seeing my son alive and smiling, I know miracles don't come from the sky. They come from love, from the connection between humans and nature. From a soul named Aslan." Helen followed, her voice steady, though quietly moved. "We created this fund to save abandoned infants and forgotten animals. Because perhaps, those silent souls are the guardian angels we never thought to believe in. The Solomon's Gift Foundation began with a simple goal: to build a care center for unidentified newborns and to expand sanctuaries that connect humans with endangered animals. Every week, Helen would visit the small memorial near the oak tree, the place believed to be where Aslan vanished into the night. One day, as Elijah began learning to speak, he looked up at a painting on the wall, a portrait of Aslan drawn from Helen's memory, and whispered. Mama said, "He's the light." Helen knelt beside him, holding the boy tightly. Outside the window, the breeze gently stirred the white curtains, carrying with it the scent of grass and morning sunlight. In that moment, Helen needed no further explanation. And that was the end of the story. A lion had walked into a hospital, not to bring fear, but to offer hope. A mother had sent her love beyond the veil of death. And a nurse, simply following her heart, had become a witness to the final miracle of loyalty. Aslan may have vanished, but his legacy would live on, not only in the story we tell, but in the actions it inspires.